So here we have the 3rd generation Lexus IS, and here we have the 4th generation Lexus GS. Now, what's the difference between these two cars? It's pretty simple. This is smaller and this is bigger. This is less premium and this is more premium. Traditionally, the bigger the car, the more premium the car is. You would expect this to be the same thing as that, but just bigger and more premium. But that's not quite the case. You see, I've owned 2 of these cars and 3 of these cars, and I've found it difficult to decide which car to buy because there are some of these weird differences between these products. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through some of these differences, and some of these differences are to be expected because, again, it's bigger and more premium. But there are some differences that are weird, and I think that they are a bit of a letdown. So as we go through these differences, I'm going to talk through all of those, and hopefully by the end of the video it's going to help you decide whether the IS is the car for you or the GS is the car for you. So we're going to start this comparison with the exterior styling of these cars. Now, of course, styling is subjective, so you might agree, you might not, but this is kind of based on my opinion, but also a number of my friends and family that have seen me driving these 2 cars over the last couple of years. So I think it's fair to say, based on their general consensus, the IS is a lot more stylish. The lines, the detail, all the angles are beautiful. They look hand sculpted. It's bold, it's aggressive, but it's also elegant and graceful. Every line has been designed with so much intention. Now the GS, on the other hand, I can't quite say the same thing. The GS, to me, and to many other people's opinions, it looks a lot blockier and kind of old manish. Now, this is actually an aftermarket front bumper. It's based off the GSF that came out a little bit later, so it does look a little bit better, but still looks kind of old manish. In particular, the pre-facelift non-F-Sport GS, when it came out in 2013, looks particularly old manish. The front bumper is just so tame, and it just remember, these 2 cars came out pretty much at the exact same time, and it's quite a massive difference. It's just not, it looks like there was not as much thought put into the shapes and angles that are on this car. The headlights in particular, you can see how much bigger and fatter these headlights are. The daytime running lights, these, the LEDs are quite far, they're quite spread apart, whereas in here it looks a lot more, what's the word? Like, just nicer, basically. So yeah, so I mean, again, it's subjective, but in my mind, when I look at it, I think this is what I expect from a beautiful design Lexus car. And a lot of the newer Lexus models look very elegant, look very beautiful, but the GS, I just don't get how they were designed at the same time. And in my mind, it's a bit of a letdown that the GS did not come out the way it looked in the facelift model. It should have looked like the 2016 facelift back in 2013. Now, moving on into the interior of the GS, it's a very, very nice place to be in. There's lots of soft touch materials over the entire cabin, even down in the lower parts of the door cards. The dashboard's got this beautiful contrast stitching that runs along the very top. It's all very soft and padded. All the switchgear and dials feel very nice. Obviously, it's a bigger car, so there's a bit more room as well. And I would just say in general that the GS interior is as to be expected. It's what you'd expect for a mid-size luxury sedan. So here we are in the cabin of the IS, and it's definitely a huge improvement over the 2nd generation IS. It's very, very beautiful. There's nice soft padding on the sides here. The center cluster and all that is very, very nice. Definitely an improvement. But of course, being a compact sedan, therefore being a little bit less premium, there are some cheaper materials that are being used, some scratchy cheap plastics down the bottom. That's okay, that's to be expected. The top part doesn't have as much of a nicer contrast stitching with the padded leather. There's a little bit here over the gauge cluster, which is still quite nice. Overall though, it is a nice cabin, and it's totally what I would expect for a compact luxury sedan. Now the seats in the GS are also very, very comfortable. And one of my first complaints about when I got into the IS was just I missed the amount of seat adjustments that came in the luxury package of the GS. If you get the luxury package, you get 18 ways of adjustment for both the driver and the front passenger. If you get the F Sport, you get 16 way for the driver and only 10 way for the passenger. And if you get the base model, you only get 10 ways of adjustment. And honestly, this car has been perfect for long road trips because both in the front and the back seat, the extra space that you get, the seat comfort and everything, it's just so much nicer. One thing I really appreciate about the GS is the fact that Lexus has gone to the extent of dampening the powered seat controls. So it's hard to maybe notice on camera. I don't know if it's going to be picked up very easily, but if I move my seat forward, it slowly speeds up and it slowly slows down again. It's very soft and gradual. All the movements are very soft. And Lexus's interiors have a lot of dampening in all of their parts, and sunglass holders and the cup holders, everything is very soft and nicely dampened. But I don't know many manufacturers or other cars for that matter that dampen the seat adjustments. So I do really appreciate that. The third generation IS seats are quite interesting. They are a bit more comfortable than the previous seats. Definitely when I compare them back to back, these are more comfortable. However, there's still only 10 ways of seat adjustment. The previous IS had 10 ways, so there's been no improvements. The GS, as I mentioned earlier, has up to 18 ways of adjustment. And I don't understand why Lexus didn't bother to give you a couple of extra ways of improving the seat comfort. For example, there is no thigh extension support. Even in the F Sport model, even in the luxury model, none of them have thigh extension support or even controlled powered side bolsters. There's none of that. The lumbar support is only forward and back. The C-Class has got forwards, backwards, up and down. And I think Lexus before, it also had memory seats for the front passenger. It was the only manufacturer that had front passenger memory seats when the second Gen IS first came out. So they've actually stepped backwards. They've removed front passenger memory seats and they've not improved the seat adjustments of the IS. So for that reason, I would say that the seats in general are a bit of a letdown compared to the previous generation IS. Let's talk about the sound systems. So in the GS, it comes standard with a 14 speaker sound system, and you can upgrade to the Mark Levinson 17 speaker sound system. Now firstly, I've owned both models, both with and without the Mark Levinson, and I would say it's pretty similar. Honestly, the Mark Levinson is definitely a lot better, but the standard 14 speaker is probably one of the best, I would argue one of the best standard sound systems in any car. It sounds incredible. So yes, try and go for Mark Levinson systems if you can, but in the GS, if you're struggling to find the right car with all the right options and it doesn't have Mark Levinson, it's honestly still of a very high standard. As well as that, being a more premium car, there's more sound deadening in the doors, there's more sound absorption, so there's a lot less rattling going on as well. You can turn this up, you can crank it up, and there's very minimal to no rattling in the car doors, and that's really important. A lot of other sound systems in other cars, they sound good, but they rattle very easily, and the GS is not like that. So this is definitely well above expectations for this kind of car. The sound system in the IS is still above average. It's still a solid sound system. You still get a subwoofer, you still get about, I think it's about 10 speakers or so. So it's still a pretty decent sound system. Unlike the GS, the doors aren't as soundproofed, and there's more rattles going on as well. So that isn't as great. And unlike the GS, the Mark Levinson system does sound quite a lot better than the standard sound system. The GS, they're both very good, but the IS, there's quite a big difference. And me owning an IS, I have to have the Mark Levinson sound system because the base one just isn't as good. So in that way, that's a little bit disappointing, but all things considered, still pretty reasonable. That's what I would expect for a compact size sedan. Now when it comes to ride comfort in the GS versus the IS, the GS is very, very, very soft, and it doesn't have air suspension. It's got your standard hydraulic strut, and you can get in the luxury and F-Sport models the adjustable suspension. But man, this thing is so soft and smooth, and again, great for road trips. And you notice quite a big difference between the GS and the IS. This is so much softer. And I used to love finishing work, getting into this car and driving home and experiencing this incredibly soft ride. So again, if you care about a lot of comfort and a soft ride, then the GS is definitely the way to go, and it's definitely, I would say, sort of at or above expectations for a mid-size luxury sedan. When it comes to ride comfort in the IS, it's obviously not as soft and smooth and comfortable as the GS is. It's not too bad. Again, like the engine is still very, very smooth. It's generally a quite nice place to be in, but you do notice that the GS is just far superior in its ride, just being a lot smoother. But I would say that's to be expected of a compact sedan. The infotainment in the GS is pretty much to be expected. I've actually found it to be, yeah, it's pretty good, it's pretty intuitive. This obviously has a much nicer, larger 12-inch screen. It does come standard with like I think a 7 or an 8-inch, but it's so tiny and small. Definitely get the larger 12-inch screen if you can. It was the largest screen in a production vehicle in 2013 when this car first came out. Also, when you change drive modes, you also can see it appear on the screen too, Sport S and then Sport S Plus as well. So that's quite nice. The infotainment in the IS is pretty similar to the GS, to be honest. This is definitely somewhat consistent, so that's good. But the biggest kind of point that I would make is that it's such a small screen. Like, look how large this, again, space is. And there is no option to upgrade for a larger screen. This is all you can get on the 3rd generation IS. Now, it did get, I think, updated in 2017, and in 2021 you do get a larger screen, which is a lot nicer. But definitely in these pre-facelift models, it's pretty disappointing. One thing that's quite disappointing is that when you do change drive modes, unlike the GS, you don't see any nice animation here. Now most cars do that. Again, the C-Class, when you change drive mode, it'll say, you know, Sport or whatever, but here you don't get that. Here we are in the back seats of the GS, and it's just like the front. Lots of space, lots of room, very soft materials everywhere. It does feel a lot more premium, say, than compared to the IS in these back seats. You've got lots of storage. You've got an optional 3-zone climate control with rear heated seats as well. You've got window sunshades. You've got a rear windshield sunshade. So this is definitely to be expected. And again, for long drives, road trips, for those sort of things, it's very, very nice for the rear seat passengers. There's also an ambient lighting that's along the door cards, and they look very, very beautiful. For some reason, the GS gets ambient lighting, but the IS didn't get ambient lighting. In my mind, that doesn't make much sense because they're both supposed to be somewhat, you know, generally premium vehicles, and there's no extra cost. It's a little LED. I don't know why they couldn't put that into the IS, but the GS does get it. And I would say overall, the back seats are as to be expected for a mid-size premium sedan. In the back seats of the IS, it is a bit small and cramped, but again, that's pretty normal for a compact sedan. But I would say the difference is that you do feel a bit more like a pleb in the back seats. You just don't get as much stuff in here. There's no power outlets in the back seat. You can fold down the armrest, but they've gone in the 2nd generation IS. They used to have a bigger armrest. It was a lot more sturdy. It had a storage space in it. And in the IS, they've made it a lot smaller. It's a lot more dinky, and there is no storage in it. And it's little things like that which just kind of don't feel as nice and as premium. If you compare it to its competitors, again, a lot of other premium manufacturers do try to make the back seats a little bit more nicer, but I feel like in the IS, you just get thrown into the back seat and there's not really a great deal of nice features or things that are exciting back here. So It's hard to say whether that's sort of below expectations or not. I think it could be better, really. The GS does come with a powered trunk, which is nice. I would say most competitors, most of its European competitors, pretty much all came optional with a powered trunk. Unfortunately, you can't close it remotely from inside or from your key fob. You have to press this button here to close it. Some other manufacturers, you can be far away, hold it down, and it will close by itself. But it is nice having a powered trunk. Unfortunately, with the IS, it does not have a powered trunk. It's manual, and it's even if you look at the latest 2021 IS, it still doesn't come with a powered trunk. If you look at its competitors, all of the other premium compact sedans, they all have powered trunks. So that's just one thing that's a bit disappointing with the IS. It does, however, have foldable rear seats in a 60/40 split. That is one improvement over the second generation IS, but it's definitely a letdown that it's not a powered trunk on the IS. So the GS came optional with radar cruise control as well as lane keep assist. Now, it was pretty primitive, the lane keep assist. It doesn't do a whole lot of self-driving for you, but when you're on the highway, it does generally move the wheel, and it's nice to be able to take your hands off the wheel for a few seconds and it will keep driving straight. Now, this car is equipped with radar cruise control as well as lane departure warning. Now, when I first bought this car, I actually thought, like the GS, because they both came out around the same time, I thought it had radar cruise control and lane keep assist. So I saw this icon and I thought, it must have lane keep assist just like my GS did. No, it doesn't. All this thing does is beep at you when you go over a lane, which is really annoying and a pain in the butt. And I really miss the ability, again, to be able to take your hands off the wheel for a few seconds and it would stay in the lane for you. So why? I don't get why they had the same tech around at the exact same time. They both came out around the same time, and yet this doesn't have the option of keeping you in your lane. It just beeps at you. The gauge cluster in the GS is very disappointing. It's very, very basic. And what I don't get is that it's a full color LCD screen, and it's a very, very high resolution. You can't see the pixels much at all. And yet, what did they decide to do? They've made it just a very basic, dumb gauge cluster that can only show you very, very basic information. It's basically a glorified 2000s gauge cluster, where if I press display, I just get my range, I get my outer temperature, I get my current fuel efficiency, average fuel efficiency, average speed. That's it. That is all you get on this screen, which is definitely a huge letdown for this car. Now, the gauge cluster in the IS is completely different to the GS. This is one of the biggest things that just confuses me so much. If we look at this, you have got way more options and controls. It's a proper modern digital gauge cluster. You've got your navigation and GPS instructions, your music, you've got just way more things here. If you get the F Sport model, it's a beautiful, beautiful gauge cluster which can move across. And it just feels so much nicer. I don't get how these cars came out around the same time, and yet the tech in them in the gauge cluster is about 5 years difference. So this is a real good pro of the IS, but a massive con for the GS. One other thing as well is that if I change sport modes, drive modes, you see sport appears with the red light. If I go to eco, you get a blue light. Now, that's all you get when you change drive modes. In the GS, the infotainment screen will change, and you get this lovely light across the top of the gauge cluster. And you also get that in the Lexus CT as well. The whole thing goes red or blue. And in fact, when you drive efficiently, the blue light gets brighter, and when you drive less efficiently, the blue light grows dimmer. And yet, as good as this gauge cluster is in the IS, unfortunately, you only get a very small kind of blue and red light within the screen. And I wish it was a bigger screen. Again, it's not consistent why that tech wasn't and here and why this gauge cluster wasn't in the GS. The GS does come with a head-up display, and it is really, really nice. Now it's very basic as well. Many other manufacturers have a lot more information in the HUDs, and I wish this had more information, but it is still very, very useful, and I love being able to just look up the entire time and see my speed, my tachometer, and some basic GPS directions. One of the really big disappointments with the IS is that there is no head-up display. Now the GS, again, came with it in 2013, and the IS doesn't. In fact, not even the latest version of the IS in 2023 comes with a head-up display. And that's really, really disappointing. It's a feature that when you go from the GS, you shouldn't have to forego that when going to the IS. So that to me is one gripe, because I really do like the HUD. It's an amazing feature. It keeps your eyes up on the road, and yet you cannot get that on the IS. The GS also comes with a electronic park brake, which is really, really nice. And you just press the button and it will engage and disengage. But most of the time, you leave it in automatic mode, and it will automatically put the park brake on whenever you go into park, and it will take it off when you go out of park. The IS, however, does have a more traditional foot handbrake. And it just feels real cheap and clunky. Now, I kind of get, like, they were still pretty common back in 2014, but why would they put that in here when the GS has an electronic park brake? It's not like a more premium, fancy, expensive thing. It should just be in all of the Lexus lineup as of, say, 2014 or whatever. So that is definitely a letdown in the IS. So that brings us towards the end of this comparison video, and as you can see, it's just not consistent. Like, what you really want is you want a consistent product, and as the cars get bigger, they have more features and they're just bigger. But in this case, as you can see, there's just some stuff that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, and that makes it really hard to decide which one to buy, which is why I have been very indecisive when trying to decide whether to buy the IS or the GS. Hence why I've bought a couple of these and gone back and forth a few times. Really, the GS should just have the gauge cluster that came in the IS and a few other features that came in the IS, and it should be a more beautiful car. And the IS should be a car that has some of the extra little bits of comfort and the HUD and those sorts of little things that you don't get on the IS but you get on the GS. And so I just wish there was basically the perfect car, but the perfect car doesn't exist, so we all know that. But anyway, they're both still great cars. They both are reliable Lexus cars. They're both very, very smooth to drive. They're both very comfortable and very nice to drive. And if you're like me, you'll be a bit indecisive. Now I'm selling the GS and I'm going back to the IS. I just do think that whenever, in fact, actually one thing that made me want to buy the IS and go back to the IS was the fact that I had parked up my GS somewhere and I saw an IS parked next to it. And I just thought to myself, man, the IS is it just looks so much better than the GS. And as nice and as comfortable as the GS is, I don't need all of the extra room that you get in the GS. My wife and I, we don't have any kids, so it's pretty easy to fit into the IS. It's nimble, it's fast. I don't, need all the stuff which the GS comes with. And unfortunately, I don't want to compromise on some of the GS features, but all in all, I do think right now at our point in our life, in our lives, the IS is the car that we've decided to go for. But anyway, I hope you found this video useful, and if you have any other points that you think I should have brought up, please mention them down in the comments below. A lot of these issues that I've mentioned were actually addressed in the facelifts that came out in 2016, 2017, but even then some of those things haven't been rectified. So hopefully this was helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.